All right, we're about to connect two American landscapes that you would probably never think belong in the same sentence: the classic suburb and the quiet, sprawling cemetery. Turns out the link between them isn't just a surprising piece of trivia, it's the hidden blueprint for how we live, and it's pointing us toward a major crisis that's just over the horizon.
So let me just pose this question right at the start. It's a little provocative, I know. But what if the blueprint for the American dream, the single-family home, the green lawn, the winding street, what if it wasn't designed for the living at all? What if it was first perfected for the dead? Stick with me here, because the answer reveals the secret history of how we live and ultimately how we die.
So how are these two places connected? Well, believe it or not, the story actually begins by looking into our near future. There's this strange paradox brewing, a collision where we might soon have way too many homes for the living and not nearly enough space for the dead. On one hand, you have what demographers are calling the silver tsunami. The huge baby boomer generation is starting to age out of their homes, which is likely going to lead to a glut of suburban houses on the market. But on the other hand, that exact same generation is going to create a death boom, which means an unprecedented demand for burial space in a country that is frankly running out of it. Let's put some real numbers to this. By the mid-2030s, estimates suggest that over 20 million homes will hit the market from boomers alone. In a lot of areas, that's going to create a serious surplus, and you know what that means: supply and demand. It could potentially push property values down as there just aren't enough buyers from smaller generations to absorb it all. Now contrast that with the space needed for the dead. For the millions of baby boomers expected to pass away by 2042, giving them all traditional burials would require an estimated 130 square miles of new cemetery land. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's an area bigger than the entire city of Philadelphia. So there's the paradox: a surplus of homes for the living, a critical shortage of space for the dead. How on earth did we get here? The answer, it turns out, is buried in a shared and mostly forgotten history. The roots of both the American suburb and the American cemetery, well, they trace back to the exact same place and the exact same idea. So, meet the blueprint: Mount Auburn Cemetery, founded way back in 1831 just outside Boston. Now before this, you got to understand, city graveyards were awful. They were crowded, unsanitary, just grim places you'd want to avoid. Mount Auburn was a radical reinvention. It was America's first large-scale, park-like landscape design for the public. This was almost 30 years before New York Central Park even existed. It was beautiful, serene, a genuine escape from the city. And this is where the connection just becomes undeniable. The design of the very first suburbs was a direct copy and paste from the cemetery blueprint. Just look at the parallels here. Mount Auburn introduced these winding, curvy roads that followed the natural landscape. Early suburbs like Riverside, Illinois, did the exact same thing. Both were zoned for a single purpose: burials only or homes only. And, this is the real kicker, both established private governing bodies, basically the ancestors of the modern HOA, to enforce rules and protect property values. And you can see on this timeline just how fast this whole idea spread. The transition was swift, it was direct. This rural cemetery model proved that a beautiful, park-like setting on the edge of town was super popular and profitable. So of course, real estate developers were paying close attention. They started building communities for the living that looked almost identical to these brand new cities for the dead. So these two sibling landscapes, born from the exact same idea, just kept evolving side by side. As America industrialized, so did the way we mass-produced our suburbs and our cemeteries. They both got put on the assembly line. After World War II, this whole thing went into overdrive. The cemetery industry created the Memorial Park, think Forest Lawn out in California. They got rid of upright headstones and switched to flat markers. And why? It wasn't just for looks, it was for ruthless efficiency. It meant you could mow the whole place on an industrial scale. At the exact same time, you had developers like Levitt & Sons applying assembly line techniques to create Levitowns, standardized homes on standardized lots, all designed for mass production. It's the same logic. And this parallel design goes all the way up to how these places are governed. The Cemetery Board and the Homeowners Association, the HOA, they're essentially mirror images of each other. Both of them act like little private governments. They have the power to enforce really strict rules about aesthetics, everything from the color you can paint your house to the kind of flowers you can put on a grave. And their number one mission? It's identical: protect property values. But we have to talk about the darker side of this shared history. Both of these privately run systems were used as tools of exclusion. Suburban deeds famously included racial covenants that barred non-white families from buying homes. At the same time, private cemeteries were often segregated. And this created what some historians call a layered injustice. Not only were black families excluded from these new communities in life, but as those same white suburbs expanded, they often paved right over and completely erased historic African-American burial grounds, which just didn't have the same legal or financial protections. Both of these systems, the cemetery and the suburb, were built on this promise of permanence. You know, a forever maintained lawn, a stable property value that will never go down. But this promise of perpetuity, well, it has a price, and the bill is now coming due. Cemeteries sell plots with a promise of perpetual care, which is supposed to be funded by these special trust funds, but those funds are incredibly vulnerable. The case of Clayton Smart is a pretty shocking example. In the early 2000s, he bought up dozens of cemeteries and was later accused of looting their trust funds to the tune of $70 million. The cemeteries just fell into ruin, with grass growing waist-high, a powerful and sad illustration of how fragile that financial model can be. And we are seeing a direct parallel to this in the suburbs. So many HOAs, especially in older developments, have been underfunding their reserve accounts for decades just to keep the monthly fees low. But now, as the roads, roofs, and pipes from the 1960s all start to fail at once, they're facing insolvency. They simply can't afford the repairs, and that creates a massive crisis for all the homeowners. Which brings us right back to the future. That demographic collision we talked about, the silver tsunami and the death boom, it's forcing us to completely rethink these landscapes that we've kept so separate for nearly 200 years. The culture around death is already shifting in a big way. By 2045, it's projected that over 80% of Americans will choose cremation. That dramatically reduces the demand for land. It's really the first big step in decoupling death from the infinite consumption of real estate. But now there's an even more transformative technology coming on the scene: natural organic reduction, also known as human composting. It's legal in a growing number of states, and this process turns a human body into about a cubic yard of nutrient-rich soil. This completely flips the script. Instead of death being a land use problem, it actually becomes a regenerative act that gives back to the earth. And this shift in thinking is opening up some incredible new possibilities. Innovators are already proposing solutions that reunite the living and the dead. I mean, imagine converting failing suburban golf courses into beautiful memorial parks, or retrofitting dead malls into vibrant community hubs with housing, clinics, and spaces for remembrance. Or even just changing zoning laws to allow for smaller secondary homes on existing properties so that seniors can age in their own communities. The solutions are out there, if we're just willing to break down the walls we built so long ago. So for almost 2 centuries, the American landscape has been defined by this strict separation of life and death. It's a model that began in the cemetery and was perfected in the suburb. And now, that model is facing a major crisis. It leaves us with a final and I think fascinating question. Can the very landscapes that were designed to keep us apart finally be redesigned to bring us all back together?